My name is Maria Rossi, and for the last decade, the rhythm of my life was measured in the quiet, steady beats of devotion. It was in the familiar click of the thermostat I'd adjust for my aging parents, Antonio and Sophia, in the rhythm of my knife chopping vegetables for their evening meal, and in the low hum of my car's engine during the countless drives to and from doctor's appointments. I was their bookkeeper, their chef, their chauffeur, and their constant companion. I did it without complaint, my own life. A career in graphic design I downshifted to freelance. A social life that had dwindled to a precious few understanding friends, molded around their needs. Our paid-off family home on Maple Avenue was my sanctuary, a place of warmth and memory, every scuff on the floorboards a story. My brother, Tom Rossi, was a ghost in this story, a name mentioned in passing. He was a high-flying real estate agent in the city, a man who projected an image of dazzling success that I suspected was built on a mountain of debt. His visits were rare, flashy incursions, always brief and filled with breezy promises to call more often. Then, one day, the ghost reappeared, clothed in a sudden, suffocating affection. He arrived with expensive bouquets and a new, somber tone of concern in his voice. He'd sit with our parents for hours, his charm a thick, sweet poison, reminiscing about the old days and speaking of the frightening complexities of the modern world. He began to plant seeds of doubt about my simple, careful management of their finances. "You need to protect your assets," he'd say to our father, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "The world isn't as simple as it used to be. You need a professional, someone who understands the market to make sure you're secure." He was talking about himself, of course. He convinced them, in their gentle, trusting confusion, to grant him power of attorney. I fought it, my protests sounding shrill and jealous even to my own ears. "Maria, he's your brother," my mother said, her hand on my arm. "He just wants to help." The betrayal, when it came, was a flash flood that swept away the foundations of my world. A month after the papers were signed, a "for sale" sign was hammered into the lawn of our family home. Tom sold it with a breathtaking, predatory speed, for a price that made my head spin. He assured me it was all part of the plan. He had found a wonderful new facility for them, a place with professional care, and he was going to invest the profits to create a nest egg that would last them forever. He moved them into a bleak, understaffed state facility on the edge of town, a place that smelled of disinfectant and despair. He dropped their boxes in a cramped, shared room and left before they had even unpacked. He told me they were better off with professionals. Then, he used their life savings, the $500,000 from the sale of their home, to detonate a bomb of luxury in his own life. He bought a flashy new condo downtown and poured the rest into a risky development venture he'd been dreaming of. I stood in the doorway of my parents' new, desolate room, a place devoid of memory or warmth, and I realized my brother had not just sold a house. He had sold our entire history, and he had abandoned the two people who loved him most for the cold, hard promise of a commission. My heartbreak was a physical thing, a crushing weight in my chest. But beneath it, a different feeling began to smolder, a cold, meticulous rage. First time I visited my parents alone in that place, the full horror of Tom's betrayal settled in. The facility, which he had described as top of the line, was a warehouse of neglect. The air was heavy with a sorrow so thick you could taste it. My father, Antonio, a proud man who had built his own business from scratch, sat in a vinyl armchair staring at a blank television screen. His glasses were missing, and when I asked the harried-looking nurse about them, she shrugged and said they'd probably turn up. My mother, Sophia, who had always taken such pride in her appearance, was still in her nightgown at 2 in the afternoon, her beautiful silver hair uncombed. She clutched my hand, her eyes filled with a fearful confusion. "Is Tom coming back soon, Maria?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. "He said this was just for a little while." I spent the afternoon there, a silent witness to 100 small cruelties. Call bells that rang for minutes on end without answer, a meal that consisted of a gray, unidentifiable puree and the vacant, lonely expressions on the faces of the other residents. I documented everything. I took discreet photographs with my phone, the stained linoleum floors, the peeling paint on the walls, the threadbare blanket on my mother's bed. I made notes of the staff-to-patient ratio, the listless atmosphere, the profound lack of dignity. This was not professional care, it was an abandonment. I drove home in a daze of fury. A photograph on my phone, a separate, burning indictment of my brother. This was not just a poor choice. It was an act of deliberate, monstrous cruelty. He hadn't just put them here to save money. He had put them here so they would be forgotten, out of sight and out of mind, while he played the role of the successful tycoon with their life savings. The grief I felt for my parents was now intertwined with a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer just a heartbroken daughter. I was an investigator. My mission was to uncover the full extent of Tom's crimes and to build a case so airtight, so damning, that it would not just stop him, but utterly dismantle the life he had built on our parents' suffering. The first step was to follow the money. I knew Tom's greed and arrogance would have made him careless. I found a forensic accountant, a sharp, steel-eyed woman named Alina Vance, who specialized in cases of elder financial abuse. I laid out the story for her in her quiet, organized office. I showed her the photos of the facility. I gave her the details of the house sale and the last known bank statements I had. She listened without interruption, her expression growing grimmer with every word. When I finished, she looked at me, her eyes filled with a calm, professional anger. "People like your brother," she said, her voice tight with disdain. "They believe they are smarter than everyone else. They believe the rules don't apply to them. That is always their mistake. Let's go find his." While Alina Vance began her meticulous excavation of the financial records, I continued my own investigation on the ground. I became a regular, smiling presence at the nursing home, a wolf in sheep's clothing. I brought cookies for the staff, learning their names and their schedules, listening to their complaints about being overworked and underpaid. I befriended a young, compassionate care aide named Sarah, who was new to the job and already deeply disillusioned. One afternoon, as we sat in the bleak little courtyard, I confided in her, telling her a carefully edited version of the story, focusing on my concern for my parents' well-being. Her professional facade crumbled, and she told me the truth about the facility. The chronic understaffing, the corners cut on food and medical supplies, the management that cared only about profit. She told me my parents were not the only ones being neglected. It was a systemic issue. Her testimony, which she later agreed to provide in a sworn affidavit, would become a crucial pillar of my case. Meanwhile, Tom was living a life of spectacular, shameless indulgence. A mutual acquaintance, unaware of the chasm that had opened between us, forwarded me a link to a glossy magazine article about the city's hottest new real estate developers. There was my brother, smiling from the pages, standing in a stunning, minimalist condo with panoramic city views. The article quoted him extensively about his bold new vision for a downtown revitalization project, the very project he was funding with my parents' money. He spoke of legacy, of building something that would last. The hypocrisy was so profound it made me nauseous. He had torched his own family's legacy for this, a monument to his own ego. The contrast between his life and our parents was a visceral, gaping wound. While he was sipping champagne at gallery openings, my father was eating lukewarm soup with a plastic spoon. While he was sleeping on 1,000 thread-count sheets, my mother was shivering under a thin, worn-out blanket. I saved the article, adding it to the growing mountain of evidence. Every lavish purchase, every arrogant quote, was another stone in the wall I was building around him. I was no longer just fighting for my parents' comfort. I was fighting for a moral balancing of the universe. I was fighting to prove that a life of deceit and cruelty could not, and would not, be rewarded. The day Alina Vance delivered her final report was the day the tide of the war officially turned. I sat in her office as she laid out a series of binders on the table, each one meticulously tabbed and organized. "It's worse than we thought, Maria," she said, her voice grim. "Your brother wasn't just careless, he was voracious." The report was a devastating, forensic map of Tom's greed. The $500,000 from the sale of the house had been deposited into a joint account with our father. Within 24 hours, Tom had begun to move the money. The first transfer was a wire for $150,000, a down payment on his new luxury condo. Then came the credit card payments, tens of thousands of dollars to clear the massive debts he had accumulated. Then, the most significant transfer, $300,000 wired to an LLC he had created just a week after gaining power of attorney. This was the seed money for his grand development project. In less than a month, my parents' entire life savings, the fruit of 50 years of hard woe, and careful saving, had been consumed. What was left was a pittance, just enough to cover the monthly fees for the abysmal state facility. He had even used their account to pay for his designer clothes, his expensive dinners, his car payments. All told, Alina concluded, pointing to the final summary page, we can directly trace $427,000 of your parents' money being used for his personal enrichment and business ventures, all while they were living in state-supported squalor. She handed me the report. It was heavy in my hands, a physical manifestation of his betrayal. This isn't just a report, Maria, she said. This is a confession. He's documented his own crimes. Armed with Alina's report, my photographs, and the affidavit from the care aide, I hired a lawyer. He was a sharp, aggressive attorney named Ben Carter who specialized in elder law and had a reputation as a shark. When he saw the evidence I had compiled, his eyes lit up with a righteous fire. This is one of the cleanest, most egregious cases of elder financial abuse I have ever seen, he said. We're not just going to get your parents out of there, Maria. We're going to burn him to the ground. The lawsuit we filed was a multi-pronged attack. We petitioned the court for an emergency revocation of Tom's power of attorney and the immediate appointment of myself as full legal guardian, citing the evidence of neglect and abuse. And we filed a civil suit, demanding a full accounting and repayment of every single cent he had stolen. The court date was set. Tom, I knew, would receive the summons at his pristine new condo. I could almost picture him, laughing it off, seeing it as a desperate, hysterical act from his jealous little sister. He had no idea he was about to walk into a perfectly laid trap. I decided to confront Tom one last time before the court date. It wasn't about offering him a way out. It was about seeing the man he had become, face to face, before I dismantled his life. I found him at a trendy coffee shop near his new condo, holding court with a group of fawning associates. He looked like the man from the magazine article, tan, confident, and exuding an aura of success that was built on a foundation of lies. When he saw me, his smile faltered for a fraction of a second before being replaced by an expression of patronizing amusement. He excused himself from his table and sauntered over to me. Maria, he said, his voice a smooth, condescending purr. To what do I owe the pleasure? Come to finally congratulate me on my success. I came to talk about Mom and Dad, I said, my voice low and steady. Oh, them, he said, waving a dismissive hand. They're fine, settling in, it's a great place, really. Professional care. I've seen it, Tom, I said. I've seen the professional care. I've seen the stains on the floor and the sadness in their eyes. I've seen the way they're being neglected while you live like a king. He sighed, a sound of theatrical exasperation. Look, I know this is hard for you to understand. You're not a business person. I'm investing their money, Maria. I'm going to turn that $500,000 into $5 million. They'll be set for life. You have to think big picture. Their money. I countered, my voice dangerously quiet. You mean the money you've spent on your condo, on your debts, on this speculative business deal? That's not an investment, Tom, that's theft. He finally dropped the charming facade. His eyes turned cold and hard. You'd better be careful, he hissed. I have power of attorney. I control everything. You are nothing. You're just a jealous, bitter woman who couldn't stand to see her brother succeed. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a real life to get back to. He turned his back on me and walked away. That was the moment any lingering trace of sisterly affection, any memory of the boy I had grown up with, died. He was a stranger, a predator who had devoured his own family. As I watched him laugh with his friends, I felt no sadness, only a cold, clean certainty. The trial would not be a family tragedy, it would be an extermination. The courtroom was a cold, formal space that seemed to amplify the gravity of the situation. I sat with my lawyer, Ben Carter, my hands clasped tightly around the binders of evidence I had so meticulously compiled. Tom was on the other side of the room with his own lawyer, a slick, expensive-looking man who seemed to ooze confidence. Tom himself looked merely annoyed, as if this were an inconvenient interruption to his important life. He couldn't or wouldn't see the abyss that was opening up beneath him. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Elizabeth Marlowe, known for her sharp intellect and her notoriously low tolerance for nonsense. From the moment the proceedings began, it was clear that she was not suffering any fools. Ben Carter laid out our case with a calm, brutal efficiency. He started with the neglect. He sent my photographs of the nursing home, each image a stark testament to the squalor. He submitted the sworn affidavit from the care aide, Sarah, whose written account of the facility's conditions was read into the record. Judge Marlowe's expression grew visibly tighter with each piece of evidence. Then, Ben turned to the financial abuse. He called Alina Vance, the forensic accountant, to the stand. Alina, with the cool precision of a surgeon, walked the judge through the financial report. She presented bank statements, wire transfers, and credit card bills on the overhead projector, each document a clear, undeniable link between my parents' life savings and Tom's extravagant lifestyle. She showed the court the down payment on the condo, the payments to luxury car dealerships, the massive wire transfer to Tom's shell company. It was a slow, methodical vivisection of my brother's crimes. When Alina finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Marlowe was staring at the final summary page, which showed the total of over $400,000 that had been misappropriated. She looked up, her gaze falling on my brother. For the first time, Tom's confident smirk had vanished. A sheen of sweat was visible on his forehead. He was finally beginning to understand the depth of his miscalculation. His lawyer offered a weak, blustering defense, claiming Tom was acting in his parents' best interests by aggressively investing their capital. Judge Marlowe cut him off. "Investing?" she asked, her voice dripping with ice. "Counselor, do you classify paying off personal credit card debt and purchasing a luxury condominium as an aggressive investment on behalf of one's vulnerable, elderly parents?" The trial was, for all intents and purposes, over. All that was left was the sentencing. Judge Marlowe delivered her ruling not with a gavel, but with a quiet, seething fury. She looked directly at Tom, who seemed to shrink in his chair under the weight of her gaze. "Mr. Rossi," she began, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent courtroom. "In my 15 years on this bench, I have seen many things. I have seen greed, I have seen negligence, and I have seen cruelty. It is a rare and disturbing occasion when I see all three so perfectly embodied in one individual's actions." She detailed his offenses one by one, her words a verbal flogging. She spoke of the trust his parents had placed in him, and how he had used that trust as a weapon against them. She spoke of the abhorrent conditions he had forced them to endure while he lived a life of unearned luxury. She called his actions a monstrous betrayal of the most sacred duty a child has to a parent. "Effective immediately," she declared, "your power of attorney over Antonio and Sophia Rossi is revoked. This court finds you to be grossly, and perhaps pathologically, unfit to act in their interest. Full legal guardianship is hereby granted to your sister, Maria Rossi, who has demonstrated the devotion and integrity you so profoundly lack." It was a victory, but it was not the end. Judge Marlowe then turned to the matter of the civil suit. "This court orders you, Tom Rossi, to make a full and complete restitution of all misappropriated funds to your parents' estate, in the amount of $427,000, plus interest and legal fees." Tom's lawyer jumped to his feet, stammering about his client's inability to pay, about his assets being tied up in his business. Judge Marlowe held up a hand, silencing him. "I am well aware of your client's financial situation," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "And this court will provide him with a path to repayment." She signed an order, her pen scratching loudly in the quiet room. "A lien is to be placed on all of your personal and business assets. The condominium at 1200 Beacon Street, the funds invested in your development LLC, any and all vehicles and accounts in your name. A court-appointed receiver will oversee the liquidation of these assets until the debt to your parents is paid in full." Tom's face went completely white. He finally understood. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This wasn't a fine. This was a complete and total annihilation. The life he had built, the success he had projected, was a house of cards, and the judge had just set it on fire. He was not just ruined, he was erased. The dismantling of Tom's life was a swift and impersonal legal process. The court-appointed receiver was a brutally efficient man who moved with the speed of a predator. The locks on Tom's condo were changed. A large, unforgiving, "For sale" sign was placed on the balcony of his prized downtown development project, the project now in the hands of the court. His luxury car was repossessed. His bank accounts were frozen. Every trapping of the successful life he had stolen was stripped away from him, piece by piece. I watched from a distance, feeling a grim, somber satisfaction. This was not a joyful process. It was the necessary, methodical amputation of a diseased limb from our family. Tom was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the mountain of personal debt he had carried before his heist. He was, in a word, bankrupted. A man who had flown so high, brought crashing down to earth by his own greed. My first act as legal guardian was to move my parents out of that horrific facility. With the initial funds recovered from the liquidation, I found a beautiful, private care home on a tree-lined street. It was a place filled with light, with kind and attentive staff, with a garden where my mother could sit in the sun. I moved them into a lovely 2-room suite, which I filled with their favorite furniture and photographs from the old house on Maple Avenue. I wanted to give them back a piece of the home they had lost. On their first day there, I sat with them in their new, sunny living room. My father, now wearing a new pair of glasses, was reading the newspaper. My mother, her hair beautifully styled by one of the on-site aides, was knitting, a contented smile on her face. They were safe. They were comfortable. They were treated with dignity. "This is a nice place, Maria," my father said, looking at me over his paper, his eyes clear. "Thank you. You deserve it, Papa," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Their peace, their comfort, their safety, it had all been paid for by the complete and total ruin of their son. It was a brutal, tragic equation, but it was the only one that led to justice. I visited them every day, not as a caregiver burdened by 1,000 tasks, but as a daughter, free to simply sit and talk with them, to hold their hands, to enjoy the time we had left. My life found a new equilibrium. The guardianship was a responsibility, but it was a joyful one, focused on ensuring my parents' happiness and well-being. The legal and financial battles were over, the victory absolute. The money from the liquidation of Tom's assets was placed in a secure trust, managed by a professional, its sole purpose to fund my parents' care for the rest of their lives. Any remainder, the trust stipulated, would be donated to a charity for the prevention of elder abuse. I wanted no part of the money that had cost my family so much. I returned to my own quiet life, to my freelance design work, to the friends who had stood by me. But I was changed. The ordeal had forged a new kind of strength in me, a resilience I had never known I possessed. I had discovered that my quiet, meticulous nature could be a formidable weapon when wielded in the service of justice. I had learned to fight, and I had learned to win. I never spoke to Tom again. I heard through a distant cousin that he had left the city, shamed and ruined, to live with a friend in another state. He was reportedly working a menial job, a ghost of the high-flying man he had pretended to be. Our family was irrevocably broken. The brother I had grown up with was gone, replaced by a stranger whose greed had consumed him. There was a profound and unending sadness in that, a wound that I knew would never fully heal. One afternoon, I was sitting with my mother in the garden of her new home. She was quiet, her memory often drifting, but she seemed peaceful. She looked at me, her eyes suddenly clear and focused. "You're a good daughter, Maria," she said, her voice soft but certain. "You have a good heart." Tears welled in my eyes. In the end, that was the only verdict that mattered. I had not just won a court case. I had upheld the simple, sacred duty of a child. I had protected my parents. I had honored their legacy of love and hard work by refusing to let it be desecrated. My revenge was not just in my brother's ruin, but in my parents' peace. It was a bittersweet, hard-won victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. And in the quiet dignity of their final years, I found my own quiet, hard-won peace. The years that followed were peaceful ones for my parents. They lived out their days in comfort and security, surrounded by kindness. My father passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years after the court case, and my mother followed him a year later. They were buried side by side, their legacy of love and hard work secured, their final years a testament to the dignity they deserved. I was with them both at the end, holding their hands, a daughter's final act of devotion. After they were gone, I found myself at a crossroads. The battle that had defined my life for so long was over. The guardianship had ended. I was left with a profound quiet, a space I needed to fill with a new purpose. The foundation that I established in their name, the Rossi Foundation for Elder Justice, became that purpose. Funded by the remaining money in their trust and my own contributions, its mission was to provide legal aid and advocacy for victims of elder financial abuse. I used my own story, my own meticulous methods of investigation, to help others build their cases. I worked with other forensic accountants like Alina Vance, other lawyers like Ben Carter. We became a small, formidable team, fighting for the most vulnerable among us. My personal tragedy was transformed into a public service. The pain I had endured was given a meaning beyond my own family. I was ensuring that other sons like Tom would not get away with their crimes, and that other daughters like me would have the resources and support to fight back. I never heard what became of my brother. In my mind, he remains a ghost, a cautionary tale of a man who had everything: a loving family, a promising career, a sister who cared for him, and threw it all away for a life built on a foundation of lies. His ruin was not my ultimate victory. My victory was in the work I did every day, in the families I helped, in the justice I was able to secure for others. My revenge was not a single, explosive act, but a slow, steady, and constructive process of building something good from the wreckage of something terrible. I had taken the ugliest chapter of my life and used it to write a new story, not just for myself, but for countless others. My name is Maria Rossi. My brother tried to steal my parents' legacy, but in the end, I was the one who truly inherited it by honoring its spirit of love, protection, and justice, and sharing it with the world. My life settled into a new, quiet rhythm, one defined not by familial obligation, but by chosen purpose. The foundation became my life's work. I found a deep, abiding satisfaction in it, a feeling that I was balancing the scales of the universe, one case at a time. The anger that had once fueled me had long since cooled, replaced by a deep, empathetic understanding of the dynamics of family and the insidious nature of greed. I learned that the greatest weapon against deceit is not rage, but meticulous, irrefutable truth. This became the guiding principle of my foundation and my life. The memory of my parents was no longer tinged with the sadness of their final, difficult year. It was defined by the entirety of their lives, their love, their hard work, their quiet dignity. And the home on Maple Avenue, though physically gone, was a place I could still visit in my mind, a sanctuary of memory that Tom's actions could never truly sell or destroy. That was the real estate that mattered, and it was a property I would own forever. In the end, the story was not about a brother's betrayal, but about a daughter's love. It was not about a financial victory, but about a moral one. Tom had tried to reduce our parents' worth to a number in a bank account, a commodity to be liquidated. I had fought to prove that their worth was immeasurable, a legacy of love and decency that was priceless. And in winning that fight, I had not just saved their assets, I had saved the very essence of who they were. And that was a victory that brought a quiet, lasting peace to my soul. The final, quiet irony is that Tom, in his quest for a grand legacy built of glass and steel, had erased himself from our family's true history. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale. I, on the other hand, by fighting for the small, simple truth of my parents' lives, had built a legacy that was real and enduring. The Rossi Foundation was a living, breathing monument to my parents, a structure built not on stolen money, but on a foundation of justice and love. And it was a structure that would stand long after Tom's memory had turned to dust. The most profound lesson from my ordeal was that true power comes not from a legal document like a power of attorney, but from the quiet, unshakable authority of love and moral conviction. Tom had the legal power, but it was a hollow, brittle thing that shattered under the weight of the truth. My power was in my devotion, my meticulous pursuit of justice, and the deep, abiding love I had for my parents. And that was a power that proved to be absolute. I had not just seized my brother's assets, I had reclaimed my family's honor, and that was an inheritance beyond any price. My life became a testament to the idea that a single, determined person, armed with the truth, can indeed move mountains, or, in my case, dismantle a life built on a mountain of lies. The quiet daughter had found her roar, and she had used it to protect the two people she loved most in the world, and that was a story worth telling. I found a quiet, personal happiness in the years that followed. I reconnected with old friends, I traveled, and I even found a late-in-life love with a kind man who admired my strength and valued my story. My life, which had once been defined by sacrifice and then by battle, finally became a story of peace. The greatest revenge, I learned, is not the ruin of your enemy, but the richness and joy of your own life. I had both, but it was the latter that truly defined my victory.